Welcome to today's session. Just before we introduce you to the panel, I'd like to cover a few short housekeeping bits. The screen that you see before you is completely customizable. You can drag and move the screens to how you'd like to view it, so you can increase the size of the speaker view or the slide view. You'll also see that there's a question box where you can drop questions in. If your question isn't covered during the session, we'll respond to you directly afterwards. You'll also see some presenter bios and a link to the other resources that we've supplied today. There's also a contact us box so that you can get in touch with us really easily, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So I'd like to hand over now to Yvonne, who's going to lead the session for us today. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks very much, Suzanne, and a very warm welcome, everybody, to today's session, An HR Revolution, the Era of People Empowerment. As Suzanne said, I'm Yvonne Wilcock. I'm the CEO of the Empowering People Group and also of Advisor Plus, and I'm going to be facilitating this session today. In the session, we'll be discussing the critical importance of people-empowered business transformation and the role that HR plays in its success. And I'm delighted that we've been able to bring together experts from across the Empowering People Group and also our friends and partners from the boutique HR consultancy Lace Partners to share their insight and to debate the priorities for HR leaders in today's ever-changing business landscape. If you're not familiar with the Empowering People Group, we are a collection of 4 leading UK organisations, and we all have in common technology-enabled HR services that we deliver to our customers. The mission is simple. It's to provide a comprehensive range of services that support people to thrive throughout their career and through change and transition. The group itself contains Advisor Plus, of which, as I said, I'm the CEO, and Advisor Plus itself delivers best-in-class technology, expert advisory services, and business-critical people analytics to help organisations transform and, more importantly, simplify the complexity that can exist in managing employee relations. Our 3 other group companies are Halborns, Working Transitions, and our newest acquisition, Learning Nexus, who joined the group only last week. And they add a new transformational digital learning solution and lots of great content and courses to the suite of services that the group delivers. Halborns and Working Transitions, I'm delighted to say, are joining us today. So let me introduce you now to the rest of the panel. Firstly, I'm joined by Ginny Hallam, the founder of Halborns, and they provide straight-talking, solutions-focused employment law services. And Ginny's an absolute expert in empowering employers to secure success through proactive and progressive people strategies, which she'll be talking more about today. Welcome, Ginny.
Hi, Yvonne. Hi, great to be here.
Next up, we've got Claire Cowan, and Claire is a director at Working Transitions, and they provide specialist coaching, learning and outplacement services. And with a deep understanding of the challenges and the sensitivities too that are experienced during workplace change, Claire partners with HR leaders across lots of organisations and lots of sectors to support them to make a difference through their people. It's really great to have you here today, Claire. And finally, I'm delighted to introduce Emma Leonis. Emma is the Client Executive Director of HR Transformation at Lace Partners. And Lace are a fantastic boutique HR consultancy firm that specialise in helping their clients to develop their people strategies and to deliver positive employee experiences. Thanks very much for joining us today, Emma. Hope you're well.
Thanks, Yvonne. Really looking forward to our discussion.
Me too. So let's make a start. I think it's safe to say for all of us that HR teams are facing a pretty unique set of challenges right now that are putting immense pressure on already overstretched individuals, from battling against the toughest recruitment landscape in decades, dealing with employee engagement challenges driven by things like the Great Reflection and quiet quitting, and also the soaring cost of living crisis that's impacting well-being of our employees. And when we add to that the impending impact of recession and the inevitable cost cutting that will result, it does bring into sharp focus for me the need for HR teams to be as strategic as they possibly can to help navigate through these ever-evolving challenges. Now, as I'm sure we will all recognise, retaining talent and maintaining productivity are absolutely vital when we consider the backdrop that I've just described. So prioritising transformation strategies that improve employee experience and engagement and streamline ways of working so that people are prepared and sufficiently agile to be able to adapt in these changing times is going to be vital. But I guess the first question for me is, how do HR teams prioritise strategy when they are consumed in day-to-day firefighting? Emma, I think I'd like to ask you, in your experience, what do HR leaders need to prioritise to enable their teams to step away from tactical delivery and focus on that strategy that we've been talking about at this most critical of times?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, Yvonne. And as you've said, this is one of the most sort of challenging times I think that HR's ever sort of faced, to be honest, apart from COVID. But equally, it seems that things keep getting more and more challenging. And we can't get drawn into the weeds as much as we have done before. We can't keep doing the firefighting. So I suppose there's a few things for me. And the word here, HR-led people empowerment, is really key. So if we think about kind of what's stopping us, those barriers, ultimately, I personally believe this is about enabling people, so our line managers, our people managers, to do what we want them to do. And to be fair, things they're probably capable of doing if we actually gave them the room to do what we need them to do. So if we think about kind of technology, coaching, policies and process, and I know we're going to explore some of those over the course of this webinar, actually, when we think about some of the challenges, I talk to people managers, talk to line managers, we talk to HR leaders, they say, our teams don't necessarily have the right skills. We're not investing enough in training. And maybe that therefore means that our line managers, they feel that they don't have confidence to do the things that they want to do, to have those conversations on a day-to-day basis with employees around, could be simple things, it could be complex things, but employee relations related items to actually help us as HR. So therefore, because they don't have the confidence due to perhaps the lack of skills, the lack of training that we're investing in them, they then don't do those things, which pulls HR into those weeds that we're sort of facing. Also thinking about clear policies and processes. So, there is quite a lot of inconsistency in the way that things are done in organisations. Sometimes that isn't a problem. Sometimes it is. We tend to work in silos as teams, very focused on what we need to get done. But does that therefore mean that individuals in those teams are having different experiences? Are they feeling that they're being treated in the same way? Which I think, again, goes back to what is the role of a line manager and that day-to-day conversation. And there's also something for me there around, are we sharing knowledge enough? So that can be one of the barriers if we're working in teams. My problem might be something that you've experienced, Yvonne, as another team lead in an organisation. If only I had time to talk to you to get some advice on that. So technology is really important as well. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. So streamlining, automating, taking away some of the day-to-day routine admin, but more actually thinking about overcoming those barriers of, I'm not quite sure what to do right now to help me, have those conversations. Nudges and prompts can be so powerful, and technology can do that nowadays for us. But I think also linked to that, there's the element of safeguards. So one of sort of my personal reflections is we need to trust, as HR, we need to trust our teams to be able to have those difficult conversations. We like supporting, that's what we're doing in HR, but if we're going to stop being tactical, to your earlier sort of provocation, Yvonne, we need to step back, we need to empower, we need to trust our line managers and our teams to do the right thing, because actually most of them probably will, if we give them the tools, the enablers and the support and are explicit on what we expect from them. So yeah, I guess that's something for us to reflect on as HR practitioners and HR leaders in our organisations around what we expect, and are we really empowering people enough, I guess, back to the point.
Emma, I couldn't agree more that enabling managers to confidently deal with more of the issues that impact employee experience is absolutely critical. That's definitely what I see too. I guess, though, that to a degree, maybe manager empowerment is perhaps a bit of a buzzword, a buzz phrase. that leaders, I'm sure, intellectually agree that is important, but maybe don't know where to start in terms of implementing a strategy around that. I guess, Emma, would you agree? And what do you believe are the biggest barriers to that manager empowerment?
I absolutely do agree, Yvonne. And sometimes we sort of, and I say we in the royal sense, because I talk to sort of HR directors and the leadership teams on a daily basis in the project work that I do. But I think sometimes we think of this as one big, huge problem that we have to solve in its entirety. And if we think of it like that, we will never, ever get anywhere. When I talk to clients around changing their HR operating model, there's always the assumption that line manager capability will uplift in order for us to be more strategic. So for me, there's something around looking for pockets of activity where things are just working. What little nuggets can we take? Maybe it's the knowledge sharing point, for example. How can we then cross-pollinate that across different teams? So start small, I guess, try things. And as HR, sometimes we can be afraid of doing that in case it goes wrong. So we also have to trust ourselves, I suppose, in some respects here. So the biggest thing for me is not necessarily what is done. I think it's the chunking things up into small initiatives that actually you can trial, you can test, you can show progress, you can build confidence. And also not just confidence in HR's capability to let go, but in people building those skills and empowering people managers more.
That absolutely resonates with me, Emma. I think that whole point of taking small steps towards empowering managers to collectively then make a huge difference to the employee experience, breaking those barriers down one by one, definitely to me sounds like an effective approach and a great place to start. Now, you also made a great point about technology earlier, which I would like to come back to in a moment. But first, I think I'd just like to delve a little deeper into one of the other aspects that you raised around how we tackle learning and development and that skills gap piece. And Claire, perhaps I could bring you in here. How do we approach coaching, in your view, in a way that overcomes the barrier of that lack of skills and confidence, particularly in line managers?
Yeah, absolutely, Yvonne. I think it really comes down to the fact that the people strategies that HR teams drive will only ever be as successful as the people responsible for delivering them. And, as the saying goes, people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And I think this just really highlights the importance of ensuring managers are fully supported and have the right skills and knowledge to effectively deliver the organisation's employee experience. It's a cliche, but knowledge really is power. And coaching gives managers that knowledge that's really essential for them to build confidence. And it also demonstrates to them and to all employees that you're invested in them. Coaching really is vital as part of any employee experience strategy, and not just for manager growth, but for everyone across the organisation. We're in an era where change is constant, so upskilling and creating agile workforces really is vital. And I think that companies that prioritise coaching and continual learning will be in a better position to move forward, as perhaps we see others retreat during what's likely to be an economic downturn. And I think as well, in terms of, talking about building a people-empowered culture, that really requires learning and development programs that cover the entire employee life cycle, so that, as we've said, managers are able to deliver the best, consistent and employee experiences in every instance. And it starts right at the beginning, as this slide here shows. I think it starts right at the beginning, and really making sure that managers are well equipped to identify the best talent that fits your organisation. And then once those new recruits are in the business, the onboarding experience that managers deliver must really reflect the values that you want to convey from the outset. I think really to make sure that you've got ongoing employee engagement, it really requires leaders to have the skills to build personal relationships and recognise the value and contribution that each team member brings. And as we've said already, it's around making sure that managers are prepared and really understand how to deal with change and the really wide range of circumstances that may impact their individuals within their teams. and enabling leaders to adopt a coaching approach and providing them with the skills and the confidence to have better conversations with their teams really strengthens relationships, it enhances engagement, and it can improve retention. And I think without that training, or without adequate training, managers can feel a bit lost and really sort of wonder how they can deal with the situations that will affect their teams. And then that will have a knock-on effect to the employee experience. And I think, just sort of in summary, I think coaching really builds the emotional intelligence and the confidence that managers need to keep their employees engaged, supported and productive.
Claire, I think you make some really, really strong points there, and certainly the returns that we can see from investing in people in the ways that you've described there are definitely business changing in the right circumstances. I think what might be interesting for the audience to hear from you is whether working transitions are seeing any trends emerging at the moment in terms of manager training needs.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already said that engagement and retention are key priorities right now. And we're certainly seeing an increase in a wider range of coaching services as organisations look to support their people through key points in their career. So whether an individual is joining the business, whether they're returning to work after a period of family leave or other absence, whether they are impacted by organisational change, there might be some change to their role or change to their team. They might be considering their options in their later career. They might be thinking about retirement. And actually, whichever situation an individual is in, tailored coaching interventions really can be invaluable at those points. So we're certainly seeing more organisations working with us to provide coaching at those key points. Even for offboarding, so if we're working with an organisation who are providing support to people leaving an organisation, actually then the positive experience is still really important, because it could be that it leaves the door open for the future. But as importantly, it sends a really strong message to the remaining workforce. And that, again, is really important in establishing your reputation as a people-first business. In terms of other types of coaching, career decision and career management coaching, they continue to be areas of real interest, whether that's to support engagement, retention, talent management, all three. And actually, even outside periods of organisational change, we're seeing organisations offer career coaching being increasingly offered to support those who are thinking about their next steps. Increasingly people find themselves at a career crossroads and really thinking about what's next for them, and also just the importance of having that clear career pathway and then supporting ongoing career development. In terms of other coaching, leadership development remains a top priority. And as we see more organisations looking to develop and embed a coaching culture, we're supporting leaders or people leaders at all levels of the business to have a greater understanding of coaching and mentoring, and then have the confidence to really adopt a coaching approach in more of their conversations. As we've said, and Yvonne, you've said that there are many business benefits to this, and actually it can really help to create an inclusive environment for everyone. I think more than ever before, we bring our whole selves to work, and topics that previously might have been taboo in the workplace, it's now really important that managers are adequately informed and have the skills and confidence to be able to deal with that wide range of situations. And I think now, as we see organisations recognising that connecting on an emotional level with employees, that requires leaders to have knowledge, emotional intelligence, and an understanding of aspects of the lives of their people within their team that may impact on their well-being in the workplace. And I think it really comes down to, if as an employer you can provide the right support both for leaders and employees at really critical points in their career, it can really positively impact everyone across the organisation.
Most definitely. I love that culturally lots of organisations are much more willing now to to challenge and to be much more progressive and allow people to bring their whole selves to work. As you know, that phrase that you used there is very, very relevant today. I think what that, I guess, prompts in me, and Ginny, maybe you can comment on this. Surely that in itself, understanding individuals, treating people as individuals, can that create risk? And how do you deal with that through policies while still making sure that you're actually engaging people as individuals?
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks, Yvonne. The lawyer gets to talk about compliance and risk management through policies. You're already disengaged. I haven't even started. And I would say, so is the case for employees. In my view, they're often disengaged with the policies that you've created a great recruitment process you're proud of. You've got onboarding that's working brilliantly, and then boom, you ask the new recruit to read your policies. And some of the key policies are even 30 pages long, and you've often lost them at that point. I think policies are a story that you tell about your organisation. So what's cool and what's not, what you value as a business, what you expect. But so often the policies that we see are just a massive, seldom reference papers that go on forever, are written in non-conversational style and are often overly detailed. Sometimes they focus entirely on managing risk. Now, obviously, managing risk within the policies is vital, but often we forget about all the other stuff that really matters to the organisation and in the business when we draft these policies, wider cultural aspects. But sometimes when you try and manage risk with too much detail, you can get into a bit of a pickle, which we'll come on to in a bit. If you think about social media policies, for example, yes, absolutely, you need to manage rogue employee posts, you need to manage intellectual property, you need to manage brand values. But are you really wanting to say that none of your employees can ever post anything? Your best advocates. If I give you another example of a second jobs policy, yes, absolutely, you need to manage health and safety if somebody has 2 jobs, possible commercial conflict. There's lots of risk with individuals having second jobs that does need managing. But actually, could you actually facilitate something that the employee is passionate about outside of work? Maybe even put that to use within your own business. Let's say they're an Instagrammer. So through your policy, if you can suggest that communication, get them talking to you, can you tap into stuff that actually is where their employees' real strengths lie? So obviously content is super important, but how can we revolutionise the way we share our policies? How can we capture the reader's interest and make it relevant and engaging through our policies? So we've been creating for clients something called People Playbooks. They are best described as something that's contemporary, conversational, commercially effective policy platforms designed to engage in examples on the slide in front of us. So what's unique about these playbooks? Well, we keep them simple, basically. So we've seen the acronym for years, haven't we? KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it super simple. And we've all been using that acronym even before stand-up desks and macchiatos were a thing. Yet we often ignore that when we're drafting policies and perhaps overcomplicate. How about drafting policies on one page then, which is straight talking language with images and being true to your tone of voice? And what about the title of the policy? So I was in the office the other day and Holly, one of our team members, was drafting a pawsome policy about bringing your dog into work. So immediately engaging, interesting, and instantly interesting as a result of the title alone. And what about what you talk about? So do you, for example, have a policy on approach to loans and advances in this climate of financial challenge? What about a financial well-being policy with budgeting helplines, hints and tips, who to talk to if employees have concerns? What about an environmental policy, sharing ideas on community contribution to the planetary plight? or hate crimes or fertility issues. They're all a small taster of the progressive policies that can help demonstrate a people first culture. And all of those issues are a very real part of many lives today, aren't they? With employer impacts often providing really vital support to colleagues. These policies are just another touch point to show as an organisation that you're different and to show that you care personally. So if you like the idea of them, I am very happy to offer, without charge, an opportunity to rework your social media policy in a way that I've described. And Yvonne will explain a little bit more about how to access that free support at the end of the session. So just finally, obviously once you've drafted your policies, then the key is how you're going to communicate them. And in terms of how you communicate your policies, maybe you want a playbook like the one, perhaps it's fertility and parental leave and shared parental leave, all grouped together. Perhaps you want one supporting challenging situations, or a playbook dealing with everyday matters, the start of employment, for example. Alternatively, you might say, well, actually, that's not going to work, and we want a platform with policies ordered intuitively, and that works for us. Or you could have interactive manager maps that guide the reader through the employment journey, like maybe just ask your people what they think works best.
Thanks, Ginny. I mean, the Pawson policy there, that's just immediately brought that to life for me. And I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there in terms of what we mean by starting to really revolutionise HR. And I think as leaders of our businesses, as HR leaders, we need to think more broadly than ever now about how our employees perceive the business in terms of every interaction that they have, right down, as you quite rightly say, to something like the handbook, the policies that they receive on day one when they start with us. And it's really exciting to see some of those examples that you shared there of how businesses are recognising this, and they're going through this period of modernisation around policies. So thanks so much for sharing those examples. They really did bring things to life. I think what I'd like to do now is Emma, if I can go back to the point that you raised earlier about the role of technology in enabling manager empowerment. And I guess for HR teams to confidently enable managers to self-serve, particularly on employee relations matters that can sometimes be complex, then I'm guessing that the right HR systems are going to be pretty critical to providing the support and the guidance through those journeys and processes. Also, as Ginny's talked about, providing knowledge, that might be through portals, and I guess importantly too, making sure that there are controls and monitoring in place to avoid risk, and importantly to give managers confidence that they will be doing the right thing when they follow these procedures. So Emma, in your experience, what's the best approaches that you've seen that organisations have taken when they're assessing whether they've got the right technology in place to support that people empowerment strategy?
Absolutely, Yvonne. Before I answer that, I just want to say that the quote on the left-hand side, some of you may have seen it before who are listening to this webinar, but I love it. We are making tools, technologies, systems to help people. People are creating things to help other people do what they want to do better, be that more efficient, quicker, simpler, information at my fingertips. But I guess ultimately for me, the kind of hub of that question and the core of that question is always start with what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So that's a conversation that I will always have with HR sort of leadership teams, be it on their people strategy or be it on selecting new technology, or how do we reorganize our HR function to do things differently. So got to be really crystal clear on the objectives and the outcomes. So what is the business strategy and the business outcomes you're striving for? What does that mean for our people, objectives and outcomes? And then what is the role that technology can play in delivering those people outcomes? And I think for me, there's also an element of asking the business, and by that I mean employees, people managers, business leaders, how can we help you be more effective in what you're doing if driving effectiveness, if driving automation, for example, is one of your core objectives. So there's a clarity of outcomes, but also engaging individuals to really make sure that you understand what those outcomes mean and what that might look like when you're actually implementing your technology. And sometimes the technology that you've already got is perfectly what you need. It's just actually you've not necessarily embedded it in the right way either from a change and adoption side, but we'll perhaps come on to that in a second. So I guess to me, some of those objectives which we've got on the slide here might be around, we want to make things simpler. So an objective around automation, give me some nudges. That can be an outcome of that. You know, a requirement for the system is it provides nudges, it provides insights, it provides recommendations. You know, thinking about learning systems nowadays, like the Netflix of learning, that's there, that's out there. Strategic insights. So having technology that can surface different data sets for you, can actually say, we've noticed X, Y, Z based on these trends, for example, to then help people managers be more proactive, perhaps, in the way that they manage their teams. Consistency, we talked about one of the barriers to empowerment being perhaps working in silos. And a lot of the times the objective of implementing a core technology system, be that your HCM platform, or it might be a global recruitment system, for example, is to have one global way of doing things. So what does that mean? How do we drive that consistent experience and empower people across teams, also leading them to efficiency? But ultimately, I suppose that there is something here for me around technology is an enabler. It's not the solution necessarily. I wish it was a silver bullet. I know we all do. Alas, it's not. But as the quote says, you know, we're designing these solutions to help empower. By designing them, we're also trying to think about the impact that has on the human aspect. So I guess for me, it's ultimately to a question of how do you select the right technology, not losing sight of technology is an enabler of various different outcomes, but how do you make sure that you invest in getting it right in the sense of change, adoption, to drive the right behaviours, to drive the right outcomes, and complement the human element of an experience that you're going to want your people leaders, your team leads, and each of us to experience.
I love that, Emma. I love that kind of concept there that you just brought around about technology that makes us more human. What a great way of putting it. And definitely putting technology to work to add value, to free up people so that they can do their best work. Well, that's got to be spot on, definitely. I think the point you raised also about data-driven decision-making, that's a big one too. And managing big data, being more data-driven, that is, or appears to be, very high up, if not top of a lot of business leaders' agendas right now. Though I know that even some of the largest, most well-established organisations wouldn't necessarily say that they've got all of the visibility that they'd like of the right people data at the time that they want it. And they may even still be working from old or legacy technology or even spreadsheets to try to interrogate that people data to get to the insight that you talked about. And I know that can lead to inconsistencies, and it can make it really difficult to make those informed decisions that you were referencing there. And I guess I'd be interested to know how vital you feel it is for HR leaders to champion investment in technology that helps with all of those things, and particularly that visibility, that data, that insight. How do HR leaders champion that, particularly against the backdrop of where every penny of investment absolutely has to count?
It's a brilliant question, Yvonne, and I think ultimately it's critical that we do play a role in driving that as sort of HR leaders in our organisations. So that may well mean investing in new technology. To your point, Yvonne, if you're on Excel right now, that clearly is very manual. It's labour intensive. As soon as you run a report, it's out of date. So having that investment in technology clearly would help with more real-time decision making. For me, there's an element of linked to that, HR becoming slightly more compelling and forceful in the way that it asks for budget to be honest, and something that you and I personally have talked about before in terms of, being bolder with some of the things that we ask for. We want to become a value driving function, and we are. I think business leaders understand that, but technology is a core enabler of surfacing the data that exists in organizations to enable us to make those decisions, as you've said. But I think for me, there's also something of, even if you couldn't get investment in technology, you've probably got quite a lot of data in your organization already. So there's one thing around what have we got and how can we access it, but also asking the right questions. Because actually it's the question that you ask, and therefore the data that you need to answer that question, that's probably more important than the data itself, if that makes sense. So there's an element of technology here and getting the right investment in that, and HR really championing that, and potentially also working with an analytics team, if that doesn't sit in HR, to do that, to build the case for change. Maybe even with finance. We talk about HR being much more commercially driven and having that financial conversation. But again, ultimately, there's an element of technology plus the capabilities that we have to use data in the right way to drive those decisions. Because technology will surface trends. It won't necessarily tell us the so what, which I think we might sort of come on to later. But that for me is a key piece as well, the whole holistic view.
That's a really good point there. I think that holistic view, the real-time access, the accurate people analytics, all of those things, and I think the phrase you used was to ask the right questions as much as gather the right answers is really essential to business success. Thanks for that, Emma. And I know also that there is lots of data out there. There are loads of studies that show the correlation between positive employee experiences and productivity. And, it's impossible to ignore stats like the one that you can see on the slide there from Gartner. From reduced absenteeism to increasing retention, the knock-on effect of customer experiences being much more positive, having granular people analytics to spot trends, to identify poor performance and areas of opportunity, and enable all of our businesses to respond effectively and improve the overall health of the business. I agree, is something that's worth investing in. Now, I'm very conscious that we're coming toward the end of our time with us together. So I guess just to summarise at a headline level, I think the topics that we've touched on in today's session hopefully have demonstrated that people empowerment is absolutely at the heart now of the HR revolution. And it's essential to building the foundations for our organisations to be healthier, to be more agile, and for us to have engaged and empowered workforces. And I think one final thing to mention here is that importance of engaging and communicating the benefits of empowerment, particularly to the first-line manager population, so that they're not left feeling like this is just another occurrence where we're giving them more issues to deal with and more work to do. HR is always going to be there and ought to be and should be for the complex matters that require their input to help managers do the right thing at the right time. And by empowering managers to take more ownership of the experience in work of the people in their teams, then I have no doubt that that is what will strengthen relationships, and it's actually what makes people management much more rewarding for a manager too. I'd like to thank Ginny, I'd like to thank Claire, and of course Emma very much for sharing your insights. We're about to get into some questions now, but I guess just before we do, I wanted to cover one further small point that I think might be an interesting topic of discussion for us, and certainly a topic in terms of the context of HR revolution. I think it's something also, Emma, that you and I discussed a little bit in a recent podcast, and I'd love to get the panel's views. Considering we've been talking about people empowerment, against that backdrop, if people empowerment is absolutely at the heart of the HR revolution, should we still be calling the people function in organisations human resources? And is that the right term for us to be using? So that would be great just to get everybody's quick view on that. Can I start with you perhaps, Ginny?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the American term human capital, to be honest, which we always talk about people by people in a sales environment. And for me, if I was in charge of an HR team, then I'd be looking to rebrand it, I think, as something more people-centric. I get that it's steeped in tradition in terms of HR, and I get that people understand and know what the term means. But for me, the engagement piece is not around as a resource, I guess, and something a bit more than that. So my vote is people team.
Yay. Thanks, Ginny. And I can see Claire nodding along there. What would you add to that, Claire?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a change. Certainly the organisations that I work with and the teams that I again work with, I think you start to see the change. I talk to chief people officers and people partners. So I've definitely started to notice that change already, and moving away from sort of more traditional HR teams to actually becoming, more part of the organisation, and that sort of, definitely a rise of people managers, chief people officer. And I think that's really important. I think, for me, it's about, the job title really reflects what you do. And I think, HR is about people. And I think, the more that those terms can be as part of the role, I just think it's a really worthwhile time to sort of rebrand and focus on people.
Great, good points again, Claire, and obviously that's something that we've been talking about throughout. How do we keep it simple? How do we make it really easy for people to understand? Yeah, if we're dealing with people, ought we to have people in the title? And Emma, I guess, final word from you. What's your sense of that?
I agree, funnily enough, with everything that's been said there. But for me, there's another element, which is it's not just what we call that function, that capability. It's the intent and how we communicate that intent and purpose. Because I think there's something for me around, are we clear enough about what we're there to do as an HR function or people function or people experience, whatever you might end up calling the new people team of the future. We don't often shout from the rooftops about all the amazing things that we do. So there's the what's in a name in the sense of what the branding of the organisation or the capability, but also the kind of values, the intent, the strap line that sits beneath that, I guess, and making sure that that's really clear and compelling as well.
Good point, Emma. Absolutely. Well, that's given us some food for thought on that last one there, so thank you for that. I do just want to move to cover at least a couple of the questions that have come through, and the first one, Ginny, is up for you. So the question is around, great to see the modernisation of the policies, but in terms of simplification, is it dangerous to oversimplify policies?
Oh, that's a good one. I can totally understand why some practitioners might want to try and include every eventuality. But from a good example, we've talked about social media policy today. If we pretend that we've sacked somebody for gross misconduct because they've perhaps inappropriately posted something on WhatsApp, and now your social media policy is under scrutiny at tribunal, if we imagine that, and it's 5 pages long. So we've thrown everything we can at this policy. It goes into stacks of detail. Tribunal's going to say, you didn't really think it was that important then, did you? You've got 5 pages and everything else. This is not a flippant policy. Clearly, you weren't that passionate about what employees did and didn't do on WhatsApp. And maybe within the policy, there's a process that the manager should have followed, and they didn't follow that process. Well, that again is going to be unfair on the employee and is going to be significantly frowned upon by the tribunal. Maybe the tribunal might even say, well, look, this policy is so comprehensive that you could never really expect anybody to read it, let alone understand it. So they're all real kind of negatives around drafting really lengthy, really detailed policies. My view is it's far better to create this balance that we've been talking about. So really thinking about, what are we really trying to get out of this policy? What key risks are we really trying to manage, rather than managing probably ends up with a policy that isn't flexible enough, doesn't continually adapt with organisational and cultural changes and environmental changes, and that ultimately will catch you out.
Julia, again, really brought that to life with that example. Thank you. And certainly a reflection there about whether actually, when you're writing a policy intending to try to cover all bases, does that make it so complex that people can't understand it? And that could actually trip you up. That's a really interesting take on that. I'm definitely food for thought. Thank you. Another question here, and Claire, I think I'll direct this one to you. So the question is around why coaching and not just training? So I guess that's the what's the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's a really valid question, you know, particularly as organisations now are starting to think about developing and embedding, if they've started already, a coaching culture. And I think it comes down to the benefit of coaching is it really creates that safe place for an individual to explore with a trusted partner, really thinking about where they are and really getting under the skin of developing behaviours. I think that's where really, you know, coaching comes into its own, really, when it is about developing behaviours, whether that's to make you the type of leader or employee or manager that someone wants to feel, you know, to work with, to relate to. And again, I think it really helps to just build that foundation of engagement and trust and respect. You know, training absolutely has its part, and you know, there are really, you know, clear times when training is really important. You know, if you're teaching somebody how to operate a machine or learn a new system, you know, then that's really when it's about, you know, training. But actually, I think if you're trying to develop behaviours, if you're changing hearts and minds and really engaging individuals, that's really where coaching comes into its own. And you know, the benefits of coaching are really around releasing potential for your people. So, you know, really ensuring that they can release their potential, but also around releasing leadership time. And Emma talked before around, you know, trusting line managers and giving them the skills to enable them to take on more, so that HR or people, you know, people teams aren't doing that. And actually, you know, there's a real return on investment in terms of offering coaching so that you can release that leadership time. So again, you know, people are using their skills in the right way at the right time. And, you know, it's about talent development, it's about empowerment. But I think from a business perspective, it is about getting that ROI back as well.
Great, thank you for covering that, Claire. And you, yeah, that's good again to bring to life the difference and actually the places where you can apply that to. I think we've time for one more, and there's one here about we have access to data in our organisation, but maybe not a great breadth. How important, therefore, is the quality of data in decision making? And Emma, can I point that one at you?
Yes, of course, Yvonne. It is important, and it goes without saying. Ultimately, it's critical, because if your data is wrong and you make a decision based on that, just on the data, clearly there might be some unfortunate implications of that one way or the other. Unfortunately, it's painful to spend time in sort of data cleansing, but ultimately that is fundamental. And I'm sure, you know, many teams and people sort of listening will have been involved in that in some shape or form in the past. But we're all responsible for that. You know, it's not just HR's role. As a line manager, I need to make sure that my team are recording absences in the right way. I need to make sure I put my own personal details in there. I've just got married. This is me. I literally have just got married, so I need to change mine. I got married 6 months ago, but anyway, don't tell Hubby that I've not changed it yet. But you know, we forget to do these things because we're just so engrossed in our day to day. So we all play a responsibility in the quality of the data. But ultimately, I think there's something around not just relying on the data itself. So back to that kind of holistic point that I mentioned earlier, Yvonne. The data will tell you certain things. And ultimately, if the data quality is good, the data can't lie because it's fact. You know, it's specific quantitative data points that are in the system. But we need to look at that. And for me, HR's role or people team's role is to add colour, it's to add tone, it's to add context to what the data might be informing us about or alluding to. And if ultimately, you know, you haven't gone through a data quality cleanse exercise yet, and you see some data that just doesn't ring true with what you're hearing in the business, we should be asking, well, what therefore does that mean? We shouldn't just be assuming necessarily based on what's coming out of the system and what the system's pulling. So again, it's back to that blend of use technology, use data, obviously try wherever possible to ensure the quality of the data is good through investing in that cleansing activity, but complementing that with the skills, the curious thinking, the storytelling to get that end-to-end perspective as well. And hopefully avoid some bias in that too, particularly if you're using data to drive your decisions, should be unbiased compared to opinions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everybody, Ginny and Claire as well for today. That wraps up the session. There will be some material shared with you following this session, and we'll also be giving everyone who's attended a copy of the HR Leader Success Kit, which covers many of the points raised here today in a little bit more depth. We're also going to share with you our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Health Assessment tool, and that will help you to determine whether your policies and the culture that in your organisation are truly people first and inclusive. And finally, as Julie mentioned earlier, that generous offer of sharing more information about how you can get a free social media playbook for your organisation. Each of the businesses within the Empowering People group can help with any of these challenges that we've been talking about today. And if you're interested to find out how we can help you with your specific challenges, then please do reach out. You can use the Contact Us box on the screen right now, or contact us after the session too. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us all today.